Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Fanalysis, Star Wars. I'm Reti4, this is Jedi91.
Hey guys.
And this is Jensaarai1.
Hello, YouTube.
Matt, do you want to give us a description of what we're doing today?
Good thing. So, almost 7 years ago to the day, on April 4th, 2011, I answered a series of questions that are all related to Star Wars that was submitted to me by a viewer whose name has been lost to time. And it was picked up, like it became a thing. Connor answered it some years after I initially did. His video was much more popular than my own. Evan also answered it, and that was even more popular. And in the time since, dozens and dozens of people have submitted their answers to this questionnaire over the years, except for our own Reti4 here. Callan, you have not done so we wanted to give you an opportunity to do it. And because it's been 7 years for me and not that much, less of time for Connor, we want to revisit it and update our answers for it, because some things will have changed in all that time. So that's about what we're looking at here. And are you guys ready?
I am, yes. This is Jensaarai1.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I apologize, guys.
I'm still recovering from that. Okay. So, Jedi or Sith, as in what would we choose if we had to be one? Okay, so first question. Jedi or Sith, as in which would we be if we had to be one? Who wants to take the first answer?
I'll start off. For me, it's like my answer is still the same. I'm still pro Sith, but my answer has become complicated. I very much prefer this, like, just going by the pure philosophy, ignoring their history and background, just pure philosophy. I prefer Sith philosophy because it's a little bit more about self-actualization as an individual, whereas Jedi philosophy is a little bit, it's too vague for my tastes. It's like Sith philosophy is something that you can abide by and follow as a person going out and doing things, whereas the Jedi philosophy really only works if you choose to become a monk, and I'm simply not interested in becoming a monk. Now, as for taking the organizational histories into account, I probably end up siding with the Jedi simply because they're just not so overtly destructive. The Sith have a really bad, messy history, which, we all know. It's like their organization is constantly folding in on itself due to infighting, because the problem is, I believe Sith philosophy should be studied and practiced moderately, and the problem is that most Sith Lords don't agree.
Callan?
Jedi for me, no hesitation, no question at all. The Sith, by nature, are inherently selfish, and as someone who prizes morality as above all else in human history and human society, I can't abide that personally. Selflessness should be the primary motivation for, or primary goal for people in life, as far as I'm concerned. And not that you have to be that at all times in all things, but as an overarching perspective on who you should be as a person, I think that should be taking center stage. And that is basically the core of the Jedi. They are striving at all times to be as selfless as possible for the greatest good possible. And I'm behind that. Everything else about them, while certainly developed and nuanced, is effectively a secondary factor. That is their core throughout every era, throughout every iteration. And it's something I can get behind very easily. And I try to in real life.
I'm gonna not cheat and say Grey Jedi because I think that's a bit of a cheat. I will say Jedi because the question is if you had to be one of the two, and I take all of Connor's points. And at the end of the day, I distill it down to, I think the chances of me developing into the kind of person I would want to be are greater if I was a Jedi than if I was a Sith, because as a Sith, for that to be acceptable, you'd really have to be one hell of a trailblazer, to really make that fly. Like it could potentially be done, but for me, it's the chances are slim that I'd be able to do it in the way that would be acceptable for me without losing who I am along the way. So for me, I would be a Jedi if I had to be one of these two. But that's just my answer.
How strong is your leaning towards Grey Jedi if you had that option, out of curiosity?
Oh, 100%. If I could like drop myself into the mythos, you mean, and be whatever I wanted, I would not be beholden to the Order, but I would take the Jedi tenets. I don't say the code. It's more like the general, it's sort of like what we had when we were kids, our idea of what the Jedi were before like we got the actual structure from like the lore, you know? I don't think anyone imagined it to be what it was when it was just Luke and Yoda and old Ben Kenobi. You know what I mean?
But that speaks to specifically the kind of order and the structure in almost the main eras. What about if you could be the Yoda or the Luke or the people from back when Nomi was in charge? What would the era affect your decision?
I guess if that's what you mean, yeah, I wouldn't mind being a Jedi from the Old Republic era, because up to a certain point, it wasn't like what Connor said, where they had to basically be monks. They were allowed to be a little bit more normal, and if that's the case, I've got no problem with it. It's more that sort of cloistered, borderline out of touch, and vaguely
monastic.
That monk-like culture that to me is just a little too alien for me,
Okay, that's interesting.
All of this is pretty much the reason why I side with the Jensaarai as my primary alignment choice. Like, if drop myself into the lore, be whatever I want, I'd be a Jensaarai. Why? Well, here's the way I describe the Jensaarai. They are the Jedi Order as envisioned by Batman.
And that's always been your answer, and that's interesting to me, is that I think most people probably, if they got to choose, it would be like something in between the two extremes. Callan, you're actually one of the only people I know that like consistently says just Jedi, like without thinking about it, because you've got no problem with that lifestyle. But that's fine. It's not a criticism, it's just a difference in... I don't think that I would fit in with that. You know what I mean? I think I would... I just don't think that would be... I don't think I could do it without modifying the lifestyle for me. So ideally, a Grey Jedi, somebody who tries to live up to what a Jedi is supposed to be, but without all of these
restrictions, from the monastic style.
Yeah, and even with the restrictions, to me, it's more to do with the idea that like the council has mandate over me. I would be very like Qui-Gon in that regard. I would not be just going with like, okay, the council says we're doing this, so we're doing this. Like, it's not that I think the Jedi don't think for themselves, but at the end of the day, most of them do submit to the council's authority, and I would have a lot of problems doing that if I genuinely thought they were wrong. I don't think I could place myself in that position, honestly.
See, I definitely couldn't either, but to me, it doesn't seem like anyone who disagrees with the council are restricted beyond the fact that they just wouldn't then be favoured by them, I guess. Like the council doesn't. Even that's wrongly worded. If someone says no, I don't want to do this, the council will then go, okay. They're not going to say no, you have to do this, or we're kicking you out, or anything like that. There wouldn't be that. It's not that kind of system or anything.
No, it's not. It's not out of fear of repercussions. It's more just like, if I thought the council was being part of the problem, I wouldn't want to submit to that, kind of like in a Dooku-esque fashion.
Yeah.
Even though he's a Darksider, but that would be an aspect of my personality. Ideally, it would manifest more as something like someone like Jolie Bindo, who just doesn't agree with the way the council sees things and distances himself from that and likes the freedom to do that.
Yeah, see,
that would be me.
I would be similar, but to me, that's reliant more on the council itself rather than the system of the council, of the order. That would be a case of if that particular council or a particular set of members on that iteration were causing problems. That would be where the line is drawn, rather than the whole idea itself.
And it's not a huge difference, but I think if I really wanted to boil down the differences, I think I'm a little more pessimistic about that. Like, I think I would run into that issue where you're more open-minded about that. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure I would run into that issue eventually.
Okay, that's interesting. I like that.
Pretty much what it is. Yeah. But are we ready to move on to the next, or is that...
one? Yeah, that's pretty well covered from all of us.
So the next question is favorite worlds, limiting it to 3, because we can't be here all day. So let's stick with the same order. Connor, you could go ahead first. All
right. Well, I think the world I would be most comfortable on as far as living would be Coruscant, because I'm a city boy at heart. I prefer the urban environment. But that being said, I do also like my big, broad prairies and farmland because grandparents' farm. It's beautiful. So I think my second world would probably be Dantooine. Like it'd be like I have a summer home on Dantooine, like just some place quiet where I can get away from the hustle and bustle, but still have a decent Holonet connection because, pretty much the only reason why I don't live out on my grandparents' farm permanently is because they don't have a great internet connection. I can't run a YouTube channel from out there. I like the quiet. But at the end of the day, it's like being in the city, being right in the thick of things means that there are opportunities, there are places to go, there are things to do. It's, you're not going to have a convention out in the middle of the prairie.
And third? You're allowed
Korriban.
3. Oh, okay.
Come on. It's
period.
Like it's like
just Korriban, period. Yeah.
Korriban. And not Moraband. Fuck you, TCW.
Oh, yeah.
It's Korriban.
Love that question. Well, I have to say, you damn near chewed up my list. Dantooine and Coruscant are on mine. Now, I would not want to live on Coruscant if I could help it, but I wouldn't be able to stay away from it. I would love to visit. It'd probably be a necessity, no matter what you do, pretty much, unless you really, you have to kind of be either self-sufficient or have a very isolated existence not to run through Coruscant at some point, I think. But I wouldn't want to live there. I would want to live on Dantooine. So it's sort of the opposite. I'd rather live at your summer home than Coruscant. And, largely for the reasons that you touched upon. And the only thing I would add to that is the history with the Jedi Order that's steeped there. I like the idea of like that Jedi enclave there. And I wouldn't mind living there even by myself or having a place close to it, even if it wasn't well maintained. And Dantooine does have some cities. They're just, paltry in comparison.
Everything is in comparison to Coruscant, to be fair.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good point. And then my third one is Manan, which is not a planet I would want to live on. It's just one of my favorite... things that I think is like a legacy from Knights of the Old Republic, because that's my favorite game, and it's the only planet aside from the Unknown World that was created for that game, and it was just such a politically interesting story that it's just from like an ideological level. I really a lot of my development, just my thought process, how that works, happened while playing on Manan. It's like a part of who I am. I enjoy that.
As for me, I enjoy the pastures green and variation together. So places like Alderaan, Naboo, the classical idealistic planets that come to mind when you think tourist trap. I would live there because it's comfortable and you get a nice bit of variety. You've got the mountains, the forests, the rivers, the lakes, the waterfalls that come in between. Both, that kind of. But you've got the countryside.
Which one are you living on?
It's difficult because they're both effectively different kind of era of the same sort. Probably Alderaan. It's a lot more.
Oh no! Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't say that you blew up.
Oh yeah. Hopefully, preferably, I'll have been off the planet when that happened. But yeah, for the majority of the history, it's like the grandiose version of Naboo, which is kind of the younger planet, I think, in terms of what they had going on for them. Well, it definitely was. But yeah, just the nice, comfortable variation. You've got hefty city existence to visit. I wouldn't want to live there, but you've got the expansive countryside as the kind of norm for the planet.
Gotcha. So moving on to the next question: type of lightsaber color, and fighting style or styles.
You want to take point on this, Connor, again?
I'm the lightsaber man.
Yeah.
Well, my original answer in my video was conjoining lightsabers with blue blades, and my fighting style was Gemso supported by Ataru. My answer has not changed, it's expanded. I'd still be using the conjoining lightsabers because, well, it is a bit of a cheat because you're basically saying, oh, I got dual blades, double blader, and single blade all in one, but whatever. I can do that if I want. And admittedly, I'd probably just be carrying a single blade most of the time, just keeping that extra in reserve for when things get hairy. Fighting style, though. I'd still have Gemso primary, but I wouldn't just be supported by Ataru, but I would also have Nyman to support my skill set, because to me, Ataru and Nyman they complement each other very, very naturally, because they both kind of have a generalized focus, but configured in the opposite way. It's like Ataru is basically total control over your body, wielding your weapon as an extension of your body, but also being able to broaden that out and wielding two weapons as extensions of your body. So it supports both physical combat and multiple weapon proficiencies. Nyman supports the multiple weapon proficiencies and force integration. So you basically got a very full, complete knowledge and understanding of combat. Physical combat, weapon-based combat, and force combat. And then taking that sort of skill set and funneling it into the more strength-based, assertive defense and counter of Gemso. So that way I got some good teeth going on. Like I can throw down. Especially given the fact that my avatar is a frickin' Jensaarai with frickin' a horned helmet and bull armor. I know it's a Reek in universe, but come on. Bull armor.
I'm sorry. I faded out of that a little bit because my phone went off in the background. Sorry about that. But so I'm hoping I'm not going to repeat everything you just said. I don't think I am. But if this is similar, it's because I didn't hear it. I muted my mic so it wouldn't interfere with your talk. If I was like an absolute master of the form and damned powerful with the Force, I wouldn't mind putting all my saber crystals into one hilt and go with Nyman. I like the idea, that like the sort of like the philosophy of mastering that, absolutely. But it only really works for me if I'm powerful enough in the Force to make that work, for that to be a gamble. Otherwise, if I tended more toward the average side, I would hedge my bets. I would go with both forms or both variants of Form 5 plus Makashi. And I would have one lightsaber, I think. I think originally I said two, but just one from me. Still green and still curved hilt.
Okay. For me, I would primarily be using one saber, standard hilt. But I'd have a second for use against multiple opponents if I needed to, because when I fight multiple opponents in real life and sparring and such, I tend to enjoy the second to give me a few more options if flanked. I would, however, decide to have at least one extra for a spare, probably two, because you don't want to get into that situation where one or both gets cut in half and you're like, well, I need another one. Nope, just straight to the belt. Back of the belt, pull out a surprise one. I've got more to go. Not that you're hoping for that, but that's an option.
I have to say, between the two of you, you're not the one I would have thought had 4 lightsabers on their belt. I would have thought it would be him.
Never use more than 2, obviously. But just in case of having spares is always useful. I would have yellow as my primary saber color, and most of the time I'd be using a single saber. But for the occasion when the second one comes out, that would be green. So I'd have a yellow and green, and I suppose the spares would be another set of yellow and green. Purely because I'm a practical person there. In terms of my style, I would be a Nyman specialist as well, but I would grow into it through my combined application of Gemso and Sarisu together. I would have that be my primary focus as a saber combatant, and then I'd grow additional elements onto that would then kind of form into a quasi Nyman as a result. Purely because I like my personal style of blade fighting is almost entirely defensive, counter-based, and both Sarisu and Gemso paired together brings like the most successful actualization of that idea. And Nyman just adds a lot of variation, a lot of force implementation, such on top of that. So that would be my focus and my aim. I'm a very cerebral fighter, so I don't want to be going up against like the brutes with brute force myself. I'd have to be back foot, Obi-Waning it with then a counter Plo style to defeat them.
Gotcha.
Discussing Nyman for a second, it seems to me that dedicating yourself to Nyman and Nyman alone is generally a bad idea because it's just spread too thin to really be good for anything. But it's excellent when you're either A, using it as a supplementary form to build your skill set, which is what I would have done, or B, when you're doing what Callan has described and what I'm convinced Keo Sendirach did, using it as a culmination form that kind of just ties all of your skills together, because the way it kind of encourages you to juggle your skills, if you're coming into studying Nyman with 2 or 3 other techniques already down pat, it's like Nyman would be very effective for helping you to juggle between those techniques and integrate them, and it would really help you. It would help your style come to full flower.
Helps cover your bases.
That's kind of what I hoped I illustrated by saying that, but I guess I didn't. Otherwise, well, no, I mean, if you're not doing that, then yeah, you're using it in sort of the average way. To me, like what you're describing is like an absolute mastery of the form, which I like the idea of. Like that to me is like the philosophy, I think, which is the same effect as what you're saying. I don't think that you'd get absolute mastery of it studying it exclusively. I think that necessitates, skill with at least 1 or 2 other forms to back it up.
It's almost like Juyo, where to truly, truly master Nyman, you got to wrap your head around a couple other forms. It's like when you look at all of the most notable Nyman specialists, it's like Exar Kun. In addition to Nyman, he's also got classical Jarkai, and based on the function of his weapon, we can assume Trakata. So Jarkai and Trakata attached to Nyman. Darth Krayt, what does he have? Well, he's also got Jarkai, and he's also got Teräs Käsi. And the list kind of goes on like that, where all of the best Nyman specialists are either using it as a core technique that they add stuff onto, or it in and of itself is an add-on form that just kind of expanded and became their big thing.
It's too piecemeal by itself. You need the spine of one or more of the other forms to give it your kind of core focus and make it so that it's covering the rest of your bases, rather than all of your bases are loosely covered and you don't have any particular specialization. That's kind of what Dooku speaks to when he says that trying to master all without any broad primary core is a fool's errand, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are us 3 on the lightsaber form and lightsaber choice.
Okay, so the next one is what are our favorite species? Limit to 3. Connor, we'll just keep going in the same order.
Cool. Okay. Well, for me, Sith purebloods, because Sith, and I just love the idea of a race that evolves to have a symbiotic relationship with the dark side, because that in and of itself is kind of a perfect demonstration of how the dark side is not evil. The fact that this race has evolved biologically to be connected to it, which is really interesting. And also just the fact that I kind of like their biology. They're very hardy and resilient. And for that same reason, I also really like the Zabrak. And lastly, Zeltrons. They're hot. Like, holy fuck.
What about you, Matt?
For me, my 2 favorites are the Nettie and the Nautilins. Sort of, I just like the way that the Nautilins look. They just are interesting, and I wouldn't mind being one because they're amphibious, but at the same time they can survive indefinitely outside of that. I just said atmosphere. Was environment.
It's not like the Mon Calamari where if you put them in a desert they'll die in half an hour.
Right. Kit Fisto is one of those Jedi that everybody instantly wanted to know more about just because he stood out. He looks cool. It's an interesting character design, and it's a nice blend of like the generic alien with like something that you probably haven't seen anywhere else before because it has like an octopus on the back of its head. And I've never, I don't know, you look at it and you just think Star Wars, or at least I do. So it's one of the iconic species for me. Neti, or Nitai, however you say it, it's a Trasas species. They have what I consider to be the biggest, like the greatest gift that one could be given in a Star Wars or in a galaxy as vast as the one you could explore. They're extraordinarily long-lived. We're talking in like the thousands, 1,000+ year lifespan range, and you could just see and explore so much with that kind of time on your hands. So I wouldn't mind being one of them as well. And then my last one is, I don't know, like it goes hand in hand with that. It's probably nobody else's favorite. I like the Duros for that reason, because their entire culture is built around that.
Nice. Good choice. I'm the same with the Nettie. Nettie's one of my selections for the same reason. The ridiculous long life that gives you so much chance to explore and dive into different cultures and different worlds and learn so much. Particularly in line with being a Jedi, you can get the chance to be that venerable ancient that has seen so many generations. It's something I would appreciate and being able to do if I was one. But I like them just aesthetically as well, even if it wasn't a case of which one you were choosing to be. On top of that, the Togruitans and the Twi'leks, I think, are the three for me. They stand out as these two in particular stand out as iconic character design kind of characters or species where you see them and I think, okay, Star Wars immediately. It stands out as kind of a unique, standout for the setting. Nautilans are definitely another one of those examples, but they're slightly edged out by the Twi'leks for me, just from the nature of how many of them are, how. You usually Twi'lek is more common in the lore. Looking around you, which means it makes it more iconic for me personally.
All right, no argument. Yeah, no arguments there. Twi'leks are definitely more iconic. It's just for me, Nautilans just look a little cooler. But you're right. The Twi'leks are probably one of the iconic Star Wars species. Top three easily, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, what's your favorite vehicle? Now, originally it was just what's your favorite vehicle, and I guess people could interpret that to mean what's their favorite unique vehicle, or what's your favorite mass-produced vehicle where there's multiple of them in the setting. We'll answer both. So, what's your favorite mass-produced vehicle, and then what's your favorite unique vessel? Connor, go ahead, take that away.
All right. Well, my favorite mass-produced vehicle is I'm actually a very big fan of medium-sized freighters like the Millennium Falcon or the Ebon Hawk, in that they're very practical, rugged, robust ships that you can manage on your own. You don't need a massive crew. You can totally just be an independent spacer who has this ship just to himself. But at the same time, there's still enough room inside there that you can run around in. It's not like poor Luke Skywalker cooped up in the cockpit of his X-Wing for 8-hour hyperspace jumps. It's like, what the hell is that poor bastard doing just sitting in there?
That's a good point.
Jedi hibernation was definitely something that aided him in later life. But yeah, early on, when he didn't have that open to him, he must have been extremely bored.
And it's also
Probably
like
watching movies.
It's also like most people who fly in those are not Jedi, so it's a problem. It's a problem in the setting for a lot of people.
There's a reason that starfighters tend to have larger ships that carry them across long distances, and they don't rely on their personal hyperdrives. And it's that you don't want to be cooped up in this unmoving space for that long.
Intense cabin fever.
So the second part to that question, Connor?
The second part to that question is actually a ship from the new canon, because there are some things from the new canon that I do like, believe it or not. And that is very specifically Director Krennic's Delta-class T3C shuttle from Rogue One. This shuttle's geometric design, it's a shuttle that should be blocky and inelegant, but instead it comes together like a piece of origami. There's just the aesthetics, the geometrics, they really appeal to my own sense of design and art, because that's what I like. I like hard angles and straight lines. I like geometry like that. It really jives with my compulsive tendencies. And the ship itself, to me, is just absolutely beautiful, especially when you're watching that thing fly through the sky at a distance. It's like there's just something really elegant. It's a very minimal design, very straightforward, but it's classy.
That's a good word for it. That encapsulates a lot of it. It's also it's in keeping with him, because that's the way he dresses. He looks like a classy guy. Doesn't speak like one,
but act like one. But he definitely looks like one.
Yeah.
Well, he can be classy when he wants to be. The problem is that most of the time when we're seeing poor Orson Callan Krennic, he's at wit's end because everything around him is coming apart, because he's just trying so hard and nothing's panning out for him.
It's really funny that that's one of the characters I can more relate to in the new canon, is that guy, relative to like our heroes. But yeah. All right. So interesting selection. I bet nobody is expecting that. They always expect us to crap on the new canon. But so a surprising answer there.
I am sad that the new canon isn't good. I'm really sad that it isn't good. I would have been willing to accept it if it was, but it's just not.
In a nutshell, I 100% agree. Okay, so my answer to this, as far as mass-produced or commonly seen, not unique vehicle goes, got to go with the Star Destroyer. It's just that is Star Wars to me. Like that's like the Star Wars vessel that you first. Technically, it's not the first one you see, but it's like that's the first one that you're like absorbing. It like happens to you, and like you just can't think of Star Wars without that ship.
We spoke about iconic before with the Twi'leks. I mean, that is the ship for Star Wars, isn't it? For sure, no question.
And it's I don't need to. I don't feel like I need to explain it anymore. It's like it's just that's like the definitive Star Wars ship to me. And even though it's ironic here because I'm more like of a light-sided oriented person, but both of my vessels are sort of steeped in villainy here. My favorite unique vessel is Darth Maul's Sith Infiltrator, the Scimitar. I love that ship. It's amazing.
It's very slick, that one.
Yeah. I mean, and then it's also one of my favorite little details. I already liked what little I knew about Darth Tenebris just from the way he interacted with Plagueis reading the book. But then when you found out the little detail that he designed that ship, he gained a lot of stock with me after that. Awesome Sith Lord.
He has a good design choice.
Yes.
The Scimitar is, well, the only word I have for that ship is sexy. That ship is sexy.
See, it's not one I personally enjoy the design of myself, but I can definitely see the appeal to others with the sleek kind of almost the origin of the TIE kind of side designs, but not like so close that it's screams that it's a nice kind of predecessor to them.
I also like that it's like a stealth vessel. Just that idea is cool. It's always cool. The idea that this thing that flies against like the just the black of space that you don't know it's there, but it's there. I like that.
Yeah, very cool. For me, it's very difficult because I love so many of the Star Wars designs, ship designs. Large mass-produced vehicles. I'm a huge fan of the kind of Dreadnought class heavy cruiser. That was what made up the Katana fleet from the Thrawn trilogy. That design, I'm a huge fan of. In terms of practical uses, in terms of visual aesthetic, I would have it. I would give a fighter compliment to it. Give it a hanger because I think it needs one. But apart from that, like that would be my choice if I could afford something of that scale in the Star Wars universe, outside of the big obvious iconic options. But for and there are other examples, on Starfighter level, X-wing, the Jedi Starfighter, the original class. Delta Wing. There are so many options like that on the small scale, but for me, I like you, Connor. I like the ability to walk around my ships. I don't want to be confined to a cockpit. I like the idea of having a mobile home, and which leads me to my primary choice, which is most people's choice, the Millennium Falcon. We talked about the iconic nature of the Star Destroyer. The Millennium Falcon is a smaller iconic equivalent. That is Star Wars. And to me, it's such an amazing ship. I love it to bits. The ability of it being a mobile home, the ability of it to serve so many practical functions and still put up a good fight in combat. I just love it. It's the ship for me in Star Wars, and I would have it in an instant.
No arguments from me. I would want it in addition to the others that I chose. It's awesome.
It's really cool. But yeah, those are my answers.
That great old hunk of junk. But anyway, so we're moving on to our next question. This one, a little bit more loaded. I'm not sure if we all have a single answer to this. It might be more complex. But if you were a Jedi, which master would you want? Connor, you're up first.
Well, the answer I gave in my original video was Jedi Master Ram Kota, because I really appreciate his practical focus and the fact that he's pushing for the Jedi Order to be more active. And I kind of wish that more people with more voices like that were more active in the Order, because they would have really helped stave off the stagnation. Whereas having a single leader, i.e. Yoda, hold power for thousands of years, well, not hundreds of years. Like Yoda was in power as Grandmaster for several centuries, and that I think was probably one of the biggest liabilities of the Jedi Order, because Yoda himself was, well, he was so powerful that nothing could threaten him. Until the Sith came back into the picture, he was effectively the god of his setting, and he conducted himself as such, and the Jedi Order as a whole suffered for it, because the Jedi Order basically became complacent, started resting on its laurels, because it was assuming that it was untouchable. Whereas Ram Koda was one of the people saying, no, we're not untouchable. If we don't work hard to hold on to our position, we will lose it. We have to be active. We have to do things and make sure things don't happen. Otherwise, we'll just be swept aside. And that's ultimately what happened. It's like Order 66 in the Clone Wars proved Koda and his ilk right. And they're the people I would like to be listening to.
Mm-hmm. I would hesitate to place the blame for all of that on Yoda. I think it's a complex issue. Yoda admits to allowing it to happen on his watch, but so he'll take that one. He can he holds some blame, but I think it's a complex scenario, or like just chain of events that sank the Order into that. Having said that, I agree. That's one of the things that's one of the reasons why I think if I were a Jedi, I would, if I was forced to work within the confines of the Order, I would be the same way. I would want to, I would want everyone to not be resting on their laurels, and at some point, as an Order, the Jedi allowed that to happen, whether they realized it or not.
Out of curiosity, what would be your solution? What would you have had the Council decide to do in that era, leading up to the Sith resurgence? What would you have had them? What would you have them take to stop the problem, or at least mitigate it?
For starters, one thing I would do is I would have some major changes to the internal organizational structure. There would be no lifetime seats on the Jedi Council. There would be term limits, and they would be cycling through their leadership over the course of time. It's like, I'm not saying that they should dump every guy immediately, start from scratch, but there shouldn't be any lifetime seats. It's like either you're on the council until you choose to step down. I'm willing to accept that, but only in very specific cases.
Okay.
For the most,
I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but just out of curiosity, you think that because Plo Koon, Mace Windu, Yoda, and Kiadi, was it he with the last lifelong? It was Kiadi with the last lifelong, right? Yeah.
Kiadi Mundi, yeah. Plo Koon, Mace Windu, Yoda. I think
it was Kiadi with the last life one. Yeah, just double checking then because it didn't sit right. You think that the fact that they had the lifelong term, that was part of the problem?
Yes, actually, because the problem is that the Jedi Order was basically being controlled by the exact same core group of people for decades, going on centuries.
But that's the reason for the long term and the short term, to give that breath of new blood effectively to the discussion.
The problem is that the new blood that they brought in didn't really matter, because every single person would always defer to Yoda. I'm totally for Yoda having the position of Grandmaster as a ceremonial position, but I think at a certain point he should have stepped away from the direct administration of the Order. Like, they shouldn't have centuries-old immortals being their leadership, because that leads to stagnation. Because the problem with being a centuries-old immortal is that at some point, no matter how hard you work to stay on your toes and be in touch with the times, there's going to come a point where things are just so irrecoverably different from where they were when you started out that you're a relic. There's no way you can get around that. It's immortality is kind of a curse in and of itself, and the Jedi Order kind of succumbed to it, because the problem is that, well, led by the same hands for so much time, spending so much time not changing.
But what would you have the council then, this new council that's not got a lifetime seat position part of it, what would you have the Jedi do that would solve or help mitigate the resurgence of the Sith? What action would they take as a council, as an order? Because to me, the problem with the Jedi in this era, and the wouldn't call it complacency, I think that's too harsh, the passive nature of it is tied firmly to the politics of the galaxy. The Jedi can't take active roles more than they are already. in galactic politics without immediately hitting resistance, and that resistance would, to me, undermine the security of the galaxy far more than their passivity ever did. That's why I think with the idea that the Jedi were as to blame as most people say they are. Personally,
well, they're not to blame, but they're not to blame, but they didn't help matters as much as I think they might have, or they weren't prepared to deal with matters that arose. Yoda says in the films, like, too sure of themselves they are. Well, he's in charge, and he allowed that to happen. Like he's watching them be flawed or too. I mean, just we mentioned it. Did we mention it in this video about Jocasta Nu, or was that in a separate video?
Previous
like
video.
That sort of.
Or last video, when uploads schedule.
But just the fact that she would say something like, if it doesn't exist in the records, it doesn't exist, or if it's not in the records, it doesn't exist. The fact that we are not prepared to fight anybody like us, that everybody's only pretty much, like statistically, is best prepared to deal with blaster-wielding assailants. It makes sense. Like in context, it makes perfect sense that that's what happened. But there should have been somebody being like, okay, everybody needs some skill in Makashi. Don't forget your history. And the council, you have a Jedi Master in Qui-Gon Jinn telling you he believes he's faced a Sith. They barely entertain the idea that he's correct. They're that sure that darkness isn't coming back.
It's down to prequel writing again. It's so opposed to everything I know about the Jedi and the EU.
But we arrive at that point, like that in that place that never leaves our debates on this, where you separate bad writing from the Jedi flaws. And at some point, I feel like you can't do that. It is part of the story that they allowed this to happen.
No, I don't. No arguments there. Like, to me, the nature of the Jedi, when it at their cause, is so fundamentally opposed to everything that is presented in those moments, in the films specifically, but elsewhere as well. But mostly the films, to me, they're so non-Jedi in those moments that it's like, how can that be the case? That, and then people, not you, of course, but people in general will heavily rely on those instances to kind of inform their opinion on how the Order works, like the whole dogmatic. Like, the Jedi are not dogmatic. Read Dark Rendezvous. They're not dogmatic. They're not.
They can be though. They
definitely can. They definitely can. But what makes a Jedi is not, even in the order of the Republic era, the Clone Wars era, is not. That's not by their nature. Those are specific examples of either pockets of the Order at different times or people in them, rather than the core of what it means to be a Jedi, which I think a lot of people don't understand. But
the catch there is that real quick, Connor. The catch thing is that, like Connor's saying, a lot of those people that you're talking about that are manifesting like flaws, they're in positions of power. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, but I don't think that the 4 examples we've used of the people who currently hold the lifelong seats, that being Plo, Yoda, Mason, and Kiadi, are examples of that when we're not counting the instances where bad writing is clearly involved. Not that I'm completely discounting that, but I think to rely purely on those instances is a disservice to the characters as they're presented as a whole in the works.
What were you going to say, Connor, a few minutes ago?
The other thing I would say about the Jedi Order, like just in terms of their general operating style, is that they are over-reliant on the Force. They're acting as though the Force is an unbeatable advantage, because the problem is, for so much of their history, it has been. It's like someone's scheming against the Order. Oh, the Masters of the Order will just use Farsight, determine who the major players are. Okay, kick down their doors and arrest them. But the problem is that, again, the second the Sith came into play, all the Sith were doing to hide themselves was just meditating on the dark side to cloud the Force. It's like the second the Jedi tried going in for a conventional investigation to root out the Sith in Labyrinth of Evil, well, they were in Palpatine's basement in a matter of weeks. It's like if they had just gone in for an investigation like that from day one, so many problems would have been solved. But instead, they did what they always did and relied on the Force, only in this case, the Force failed them because it wasn't an unbeatable advantage because the other guy had it too.
No matter what story you're talking about or era or which council, what seems to happen is they tend to be aware that there's problems going on, and for fear of making things worse, they don't act until things already spiral out of control, and then they're tripping over their robes, as Plagueis puts it, to put things back together again, working at a disadvantage. That's pretty much what happens during every major crisis, at least from like the film period and before.
So the question I would put to you is whether or not that's a result of who they are as Jedi, or whether or not that's a result of the narrative requirements. Because to me, that idea, by and large, with the character exceptions, but the overall ethos of the Jedi to me doesn't fit that logic. The characters as presented in moments when they are allowed to shine at their best, they never fit that mold for me.
Can I ask you what the importance of making that distinction is to you? I'm not saying it doesn't have validity. I'm just wondering
because of the distinction of how people view the Jedi and how they view their philosophy. Like, to me, what make the best of the best Jedi aren't people to me that would make these decisions, these mistakes. I'm not saying they're not flawed; they're heavily flawed. That's part of what I love about the Jedi in general. But to me, the type of Jedi that would then sit in that council chamber and say, "Let's not do anything because it will make things worse," without a very good reason to do so, repeatedly again and again as part of who they are as a culture. To me,
but they don't phrase it that way, of course.
No, I know, but
that's what the effect is.
Of course, like Connor said, they're not doing the practical investigation because they trust too much in the Force. To me, that makes absolutely no sense. Why would a council as wise and intelligent as the Jedi rely on one route to investigate something when they have so many at their disposal? To me, it's narrative convenience.
Again,
in that instance,
again, Connor's statement doesn't exist in the vacuum. It's not like they said we don't have to do anything; the Force will do it for us. For 1,000 years, we haven't had another Force-sensitive force opposing us. Like, it would seem to be an obvious advantage.
Yeah, and definitely something they want to rely on. But then when they find that we're clouded, surely they'd put more methods to use. Why would they go, well, I guess we're just stumped then? That to me doesn't make any sense. And to have them not react on a practical level like that until literally the point they did with the investigation against Palpatine, I feel like that would have been, they would have been searching for the Sith. Even if they don't necessarily believe it likely that they're back, they would be investigating that as much as possible. And to me, again, it just comes down to the whole narrative convenience that they didn't in that instance because of how the films played out. It just, to me, it doesn't fit the idea of how the Jedi would operate, either in philosophy or practical, order.
I'll concede that you have a point when discussing the Jedi Order in other eras, because the Jedi Order in other eras was much more on point. But the Jedi Order of the prequel era, specifically the decades leading up to the fall of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, that was a Jedi Order that had been, basically untouchable for too long. It's like I was saying about Yoda. He had been the god of his setting for so long that he didn't know what it was like to not be the god of his setting. He didn't know what it was like to actually be faced with an opponent who could actually resist him, as opposed to just waving his hand and ripping Ventress's lightsabers out of her hand.
Yeah, but that's talking about the issue on a personal combat level. That's not talking about the Jedi Order and how they could have stopped the galaxy from splitting as it did. There's no enemy they can target. What would the Jedi do that would stop the undermining of the Senate that the Sith were instigating? What could they have done in that situation?
I'm not a politician, so I can't make that call. But the thing is that they need to be more grounded, whereas the Jedi Order of that time frame wasn't.
I mean, it was going out and solving the problems where it could, when they were called. Sorry, Matt.
I think you're taking the criticisms to mean more than they do, Kellen. Like, nobody has said that the Jedi is at fault for what the galaxy became. It's not their fault. But I do think they could have been better prepared to deal with what happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely get that's where you're coming from. To me, I don't know, outside of the particular examples where we've spoken about where dodgy writing is clearly involved, what they could have specifically done because of how elusive the Sith threat was. I don't see what they could really do to counter that threat actively. I don't see it personally as the passivity of the Jedi that helped the environment flourish. To me, it was the corruption and the stagnation of the Senate and the political intrigue. It's always easier to sow the seeds of dissent than it is to stop that from happening. It's almost inevitable in how it happens to every culture in history, in the real life and in the setting. To me, the Sith had such an easy job of it because they were corrupting the Senate and the galaxy. They weren't really corrupting the Jedi, and I don't see what the Jedi could do about it. Even if they were being 100% active, they could definitely prepare for the war more. On that level, but that's more of that would almost be a less productive use of their time given the situation they were in until the point where they needed it for the war. You know what I mean?
I'll concede that there's I'm not a politician, so I can't make this kind of call with any kind of detail. I'll concede that there wasn't much that the Jedi Order could have done to have halted the decay of the Republic itself, because end of the day, the decay of the Republic was inevitable. All the Sith did was speed up something that was already going to happen. But if a Jedi Order had been more active, more mobilized, more aware, they might have at least been able to extricate themselves from the situation and ensure the survival of their order. They might have, if they had had their eyes open instead of just being the Republic's police force, they would have been able to survive as an order. They wouldn't have been destroyed. Order 66 wouldn't have happened if the Jedi Order had been on point.
That's where I agree. Like, to me, the only thing they could have taken and arguably should have taken in that era was to decide to separate from the Republic and go and become their own autonomous society, effectively independent of the Republic, because that was what was dooming them. And on every front, every time they had to decide to do something or take the passive approach or avoid the larger threats, was because of their duty to or reliance on the Republic as a society. They were attached to that, and that was what brought them down 9 times out of 10, in my opinion. Outside of the bad writing examples, without making that decision, I don't see what they could have done. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, it boils down to Connor. His answer for who his Jedi Master would be, Ram Koda, was rooted in the reality of the situation that we were presented with. And Callan, you're more speaking about just sort of how like the writing doesn't make sense, which I get. But at the same time, there's validity in Connor's answer, because right down to the fact that Koda didn't use clone troopers, which is why he survived.
Yeah, definitely. On a practical level, there's
not as though
that can be made clear.
Yeah, it's not as though he was psychic and just knew the outcome was going to be. It just happens to be that his reforms would have, most likely, given what we do know about the setting, would have netted the Jedi Order a more favorable result. So there's that. But that's sort of, are we ready to shift back into
let's bring it back into the
topic
question.
at hand?
Yeah, a bit of a side discussion there, guys, but I hope you enjoyed it. Needs a dedicated video, really, to get into all the nuanced detail, but we covered it quite well lightly, I think.
Yeah, it's not an easy story to summate. I mean, that basically is the story of the Jedi fall. We can't.
It's like that in and of itself is kind of the area where so many people feel that the prequel trilogy misstepped. It's like what George Lucas wanted to tell was the story of an arrogant organization that dropped the ball because it was complacent, whereas what people wanted the prequel trilogy to be was the deceived cinematic trailer. They wanted to see a Jedi Order at the height of its power being overthrown and outplayed. They didn't want to see this stagnant organization that had just been in power for too long. It's like people wanted their epic, glorious space fantasy battle. They didn't want this social commentary parable about the corruption of power, which is what the prequel trilogy offered.
Yeah, and I think there's that same disconnection between the films and the EU book material as well. There's a lot of how the Jedi are presented by different authors compared to Lucas's own vision helps bring out that distinction more severely for me. How I can't recompense in my head that some of the Jedi that are presented of the Order in those materials with the Jedi we see on screen. Yoda, for example, with his treatment of the different problems he faces. For example, Dark Rendezvous compared that with the situation we have in the films with his treatment of Anakin. I can't recompense it in my head.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's actually something I can understand, because using Game of Thrones as an example, the character of Tyrion Lannister, specifically during his time as acting Hand of the King, basically Tyrion Lannister is a sort of person where on a personal face-to-face level, he's one of the nicest people you could ever meet. He'll bend over backwards for you. He's nice and compassionate. But in terms of his broader influence on the political reality of Westeros, he helped to prop up the depraved regime of fucking Joffrey. And it's like, for me, it's kind of the same way with the Jedi Order, where they're on a broader scale, their hands were tied by the reality of their situation. But the thing is that in a lot of ways, too, they were trying to preserve a status quo that was already crumbling around them, whereas they should have just been trying to extricate themselves from that situation.
Yeah.
Are we're gonna get right back into it again if you guys keep going like this.
But it's like there's But yeah, that's kind of the end of my point there. It's like Rom Koda was the guy I would want to be my Jedi Master because he's the guy who actually understood the situation, who actually had his finger on the pulse of the galaxy, the guy who was actually kind of prepared for the fallout, whereas the rest of the Jedi Order wasn't. It's like so many great Jedi Masters got shot in the back of by their clone troopers. Rom Koda was the one who got away.
Yeah, the presentation of that is part of as well for me because I don't see how that suddenly happens. But yeah, I get your point.
See, you're doing it again. You're doing it again. I mean,
all right, back to the question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, like it's just to me, what's most telling about this whole exchange is that I actually think the situation, even though it might have been sort of badly told on screen, it opened the door to all these sort of interesting questions. Just like this discussion we've just had, we have stories that deal with all of this. Like there's all this political fallout if the Jedi don't keep doing what they've been doing for so many years. But at the same time, them doing that, like I think it's actually an apt comparison, the Tyrion Lannister one. He's a good person, but because of the needs of politics, he has to do some not so great things or align himself with not so savory people. And that's a complex situation, and that's what's interesting about the setting of Star Wars during this time period. And having said that, like that also means that I don't think every Jedi is the same, and they have their different strengths and weaknesses. And for me, the Jedi Master that I would choose would be Trasa, if I really think about it these days. Because originally, when I answered this question in the first questionnaire, I chose Jolie Bindo, and I realized, that's not actually right. Because technically speaking, even though he's old, Jolie Bindo is a Padawan. He never rose above that rank. But Trasa's a well-established Jedi Master, and the thing that I like about her that sort of speaks to like at the core of like the discussion that we're talking about is, she is part of this order, but she lives more the way she's kind of like that headcanon Jedi that we all have. Like she's a Jedi and she operates within this setting, but she sort of does things her own way in a way that I find more pleasing and tolerable. I could see myself being a Jedi if I got the out. Sort of the cheat of being able to lead my life the way she did, because she's a Jedi that didn't concern herself with the restriction of love. She was able to deal with it very healthily because she wasn't afraid of death. She accepted the inevitability of it. And even though she's very firmly alien, she's one of the most human characters you can find from that time period that also calls herself a Jedi. And she's just unfailingly kind. Not the most powerful Jedi you're going to find, but she's got a lot going for her in that regard. And she's incredibly wise and easy to relate to. So she'd definitely be my choice for Jedi Master.
Yeah, to me, I think she's a perfect example of how the ideas that are being told in the prequel era are powerful and worthy of exploration and discussion. But to me, it's the presentation that I found so jarring and so unpleasant and against everything I see the Jedi being. She's an example of how that's not the case for Jedi when they really are acting as we perceive them to be. She's someone who takes the ideas of the Jedi, takes the culture, takes the order, but she doesn't follow them religiously. She interprets as she sees fit, and she acts as she sees fit, and she doesn't break away from the idea of a Jedi in doing so. She's one of my favorite characters for that reason. But there are so many like her. There's so many who take the ways and have their own interpretations, not separating from the core, but not dogmatically following them in the same way as well. For me, my master would be Plo Koon, not because he's one of my favorite characters.
Big surprise.
But not because he's one of my favorite characters, but because he's one of my favorite characters because of the reasons that I would choose for him to be my master. The way he thinks, his personal approach to being a Jedi, from combat to diplomacy to general mentorship and his view on the world. It falls very much in touch with my own personal views, at least in terms of how I interpreted his character. And looking at his Padawan, one of his Padawans, Baltar Swan, I would love to be sort of raised in that kind of combative focus, because I think that would be one of the weaknesses for me as a Jedi. The rest of the stuff that he doesn't necessarily lean so heavily on in his mentorship, I would sort of bring to the table myself. the physical training, the physical focus on getting the job done and how to best do that. He's a hard taskmaster, that kind of thing. That would be very useful for me, on top of his personality, which I very much appreciate. But yeah, that's my choice for mentorship.
Good choice. I just wanted to make a joke at you that absolutely no one will be surprised.
No one is surprised by that, definitely. Yeah.
This next one is going to be harder for you, Callan, when it's your choice. Yeah. I just realized we were on that question for probably half an hour. Yeah. Anyway, if you were a Sith, which master would you want? Connor?
My original answer was a toss-up between Darth Traya and Darth Plagueis. I have dropped Darth Traya because, well, she's insightful and intelligent, but she's also nihilistic and, well, frankly, she is such a bitch. Like, good God. Whereas now the thing about Sith training is no matter what, you're in for a torturous boot camp. Any proper Sith master is basically going to be torturing you until you embrace the dark side, because that's the way Sith training works. But at least with Plagueis, once you're truly Plagueis' student and he's actually started teaching you, you're truly his student. You're not just his instrument. Like, he actually valued his partnership, his relationship with Palpatine. And if Palpatine had reciprocated, they could have had a very wonderful time. Just the two eternally ruling Sith Lords. And because of that, it's like with Plagueis, you actually can... He's a very insightful master who makes you think. He's a scientist with a vast knowledge base, so you're guaranteed a high level of training and study, and you actually have a place in his power base in the long term. You're not just his disposable asset like Darth Maul was. You're not just an indoctrinated cult follower that he plans on getting rid of the second you become a threat. It's, as Plagueis' apprentice, your position is secure. It's whether or not you're willing to accept that. And I personally am. It's like, because at the end of the day, Plagueis he's an incredible resource. It's like we find out in the novel Darth Maul Lockdown that Palpatine actually was the one who planned for Sojourn to get nuked. But the thing is that I honestly don't get why he did that. Because if he had just left Plagueis on Sojourn and just let him continue his experimentations on the dark side, that's all he would have done. He would have never left. He was happy. He was content. He was doing what he loved. And having a guy with that kind of knowledge and the constant influx of new knowledge because he's continuing to work, that's such a resource. Why would you waste that?
To answer your question, if Palpatine could understand that, he wouldn't be Palpatine, now would he?
Yeah.
Plagueis isn't an asset. He's a threat, as far as Plagueis is concerned. Sidious is concerned. Sorry, he's the only person in the galaxy that can threaten him, and so he has to go. It's just a shame that's the viewpoint.
Yeah. To me, the interesting thing about this is that my answer has changed. My original video was released toward the beginning of 2011, and so Plagueis, the novel, it came out in 2012. And I remembered that was your answer, actually, like in your original questionnaire, that you chose Plagueis. And my original answer was Darth Bane. Again, as I mentioned before, actually, I think I mentioned it in the prior video. But he's a Sith that put the Order before himself, which is unusual. And if I had to have a master, I would want somebody who would push me down that road. But you make a very convincing case, and I'm changing my answer. I would also choose Plagueis. I mean, that's a lucrative arrangement for both parties, and it like you said, it comes down to basically whether you have the mindset of a Dooku or a Palpatine. Dooku would have done as Plagueis wanted, as Palpatine said he would, but couldn't allow himself to do. I would go ahead and I'd be along for the ride. I'll be your eternal stooge, Plagueis, no problem, forever.
Because I'm the one going out and doing shit. You got the laboratory. You're having fun. You're good. I'm the one running the show, and you're just piping in occasionally with some device, which I'm happy for that. Always happy for feedback.
I cannot remember your exact quote, but you said something along the lines of, eternal, dominion over the Republic at Plagueis' side, I'm down. Like something like that. I mean, like that's what it boils down to. I got no problem with that.
I'm going to be really boring because I had exactly the same answer. I was going to go through everything you said. You didn't convince me. That was what I was going with. Plagueis is one of those Sith. I would never be a Sith ever under any circumstances. Don't get me wrong. But if I, for some reason, wasn't who I am now and was a Sith, Plagueis would fall in line with all of my sensibilities. Once you extract morality, and that's kind of what Plagueis is. He is an amoral being. He's not immoral beyond what the dark side makes him. He's just willing to go along with what he wants, and what he wants happens to be dominating everything. And yeah,
what's interesting?
Can be a cooperative ally in that.
What's interesting in the way you answered that was that still was rooted in some sort of larger idea because you were equating his sensibilities with your own. It's just that they're warped. Like mine was like entirely self-serving. I don't need to worry about, taking out my master. He's fine with just, I have an easy life as a Sith. If I do this, relatively, to the other Sith lives you can lead.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, so that would be my answer for it. Just Plagueis he's the least worst Sith for me, in terms of
what is that?
In terms of his personality and such.
The lesser of 1,000 evils.
Yeah, that's the one.
For God's sake, I would not want Darth Krayt to be my master. Oh God, I do not want to be trained by Darth Krayt. Fuck Darth Krayt. Holy fuck.
Yeah.
No.
I just turned into Darth Red and destroy the Order. If Darth Krayt was my master, I'd be Darth Red.
It's a brutal life, that's for sure.
He's arguably one of the worst because at that point you're not even allowed to really be an individual. So screw that. Like even Palpatine didn't trample any of that thoroughly.
Mm.
Yeah. It's like Krayt is a sort of person where he's almost declaring that life is his property and he's going to just make everyone obey. And if he can't find a use for you, he'll dispose of you. Or worst case scenario, it's like, I can't find a use for you as you are. So I'm just going to mind rape you just to be sure.
Yeah, even worse. Yeah, I'd rather you just killed me at that point. But yeah, so keeping on with this Darth theme, if you were a Sith, what would your Darth name be?
What would yours be, Connor?
My Sith name actually has an interesting history behind it. Long, long ago, I actually had 2 profiles on Wikipedia back when I edited on Wikipedia. I had to because my first one got booted because that was back when, well, you people remember what I was like in my early videos. Now go back an extra 3 years. I was pretty provocative. I didn't exactly play by their rules, and I got booted. So
it doesn't surprise me, I'll be honest.
I'm surprised how long. It's funny how long we've known each other, and you never told that story before. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So my Sith name was the name of my profile way back when, and I've kind of been sitting on it because for the longest time, I was thinking eventually I'll get back editing on Wikipedia, but with the current state of affairs, Wikipedia is just an image gold mine for me at this point. I have no interest in going back and editing. My Sith name is Darth Vatrier, spelled Vatriir. I kind of created it myself. It's not based on an existing word. Basically, I was thinking something in the same vein as Vader, but not exactly like it, but with that same sort of hard consonant sound that makes it sound vicious. And I also decided to spell it that way specifically because I intended it to be read. Because it's like Vatriir, like just looking at the shape of those letters, it's aesthetically pleasing and looks Sithly. So my Sith name is, for purely aesthetic reasons, is Darth Vatrier.
Okay. I sort of stumbled into mine as we were discussing the possibilities open to us earlier today. I've settled on the name Darth Mercurial, just because I would want... it's just part of my personality. I'm fascinated with water and liquids in general, but sort of like that fluid quality, that unfixed, ever-changing, difficult to get your fingers around. quality of it, and the word itself is pleasing to the ear, to me at least. But sort of, temperamental and unpredictable and ever changing, and that I think would want to be that's what I would want my those qualities would what I want my name to invoke in the minds of those who use it when they speak it. Like those would be the qualities I'd want them to associate with me. Like they don't have a beat on who I am really, or where I am, or when I could strike, or whatever.
Oh, how threatening you made that last comment then. You don't know where I am or what I'm doing or when I'm going to strike. So be afraid. Yeah, mine is far less impressive and far less philosophically developed. Darth Lan, spelt Lan. The word or the thing that I thought sounded coolest as a translation from lazy, which is the Chinese version. Because in essence, take away my appreciation, my devotion and my fascination with morality, and you get absolutely no motivation out of me in pretty much anything. Very rare exceptions. So as a Sith, a philosophy that is reliant almost entirely on ambition and personal drive, you're not going to get much out of me because you can't also then be moral as a Sith. So Darth the Lazy, I'll just blend into the background and devote my entire life to being as
the Lord of Sloth.
Yeah, just avoiding work wherever I can. I said I'd be an apprentice to Darth Plagueis, and this would not be an apprentice he'd appreciate. But doing everything I can, devoting my mind to trying to work my way around work and trouble.
I'm not sure you have a place in the Star Wars universe. You might be better suited to Invader Zim. You could work on the planet Food Cordia, and you can manage Food Cordia.
Yeah, just give. Even that sounds like a lot of work. Just let me go and do something in the background so no one can see me. That's where I'll be happy if I haven't got a moral fight to have. Yeah, so that'd be me, Darth Lan or Lan, depending on your preference. Also an abbreviation of my name, so it's even got that going for it, and just being lazy of Lan, Lan, Darth Lan. I'll be Darth Lan.
That's true. Yeah. Okay, so what's our favorite film? Do we all have the same answer?
5.
Is it Empire?
Has to be Empire for me.
My favorite is Revenge of the Sith.
No. Oh, no, an opinion that's not my own? Oh, my God. What do I do with that? No, go ahead.
Well, I was recently rewatching Revenge of the Sith, and I kind of realized that it's a very bizarre movie in the sense that one half of the movie is legitimately great cinema. It's like there is a cinematic masterpiece in here, and there are bits where it's poking through. But the other half of the movie is schlocky goodness that can only be enjoyed ironically. And I love that contradiction. And the thing is, I also love I love the storyline of it because I'm always a big, emo dark side kid, root for the bad guy. I like stories where the bad guys win. It's the Star Wars movie that has the most lightsaber duels, and because Palpatine is the best character, it's the Star Wars movie where Palpatine is the most active and has the most to do. It's the moment where I feel Ian McDiarmid truly shines as the Emperor because he's actually, boots on the ground, running around, doing shit. He's not just sitting in his chair gloating. He's actually, oh, are you threatening me, Master Jedi? It's treason then.
Yeah, Ian McDiarmid brings the troll and the over-the-top insanity that is Sidious to that film in spades. Have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? It's the point
where a lot of the best aspects of the prequel trilogy truly come to fruition. It's like Ewan McGregor as Obi Kenobi is at his best in that movie. It's the movie where Hayden Christensen truly kind of gets a good handle on the character of Anakin Skywalker. We don't get nearly as much of the prequel trilogy stuff. I don't like sand.
Oh, we did. Remember when she was brushing her hair and she was in love with him being love or something, whatever.
It's not entirely absent, but it's not nearly as prevalent.
Yeah, I hate a good half of that movie. I don't find it schlocky goodness that we can enjoy, or what it like. I like. It's got heights that I enjoy, but the parts that I hate, I really hate. But Yeah. I have a bipolar relationship with that film myself.
Whereas I just love the fact that it's a contradiction where one half of it is just gloriously awesome, amazing cinema, whereas the other half is just schlock.
For me, as with the entirety of the prequels, it's one of those films that could have been an absolute masterpiece, and
right.
if you just shunt this left, that right, and it just really wasn't. It was still had a lot of good to it, though, as we've said before, and we will in the future.
It's really, that to me is my takeaway from it, is that it's more, it's almost disappointing, like, because it could have so easily been, it could have been the best film in my mind, but it just wasn't. Yeah. My favorite is Boring because it's like 80% of the audience's, by a conservative estimate, favorite movie. That would be Empire Strikes Back.
Same with me.
I don't really know about boring everybody and telling everybody why. It's Empire Strikes Back.
It's one of the greatest films ever made, as far as I'm concerned. Period.
Yeah.
It is hands down the best. It is hands down the best Star Wars movie, period. I'm not questioning that. And I'm not saying Revenge of the Sith is the best. It's not by a long shot.
It's just your favorite. That's the distinction there, yeah. Which a lot of people, I think, underestimate. There is a difference between something you enjoy and something you think is good. And that can obviously flavor your favorites in all things.
Yeah. For me, Empire, it's objectively the best made film. But it's also my favorite, and I don't even watch it that often, but like when I do revisit it, it's like, oh god, this is great, like this is so good. It's not just the fact that they don't make Star Wars movies like that anymore. They don't make movies like that anymore. Like that's the thing I really,
it's the presentation
love about it,
and the power of everything good about that film. The philosophical discussion, the nature of the Force that's talked with between Yoda and Luke, the camaraderie of the crew that's being established and paid off throughout the film, the nature of even Hoth. Like, so people love the Battle of Hoth, right? But I think if you go back and actually watch it and think about it, there is so much genius in the execution of that part of the film that goes overlooked, beyond just the production quality. The way it's set up, the balance of tensions, the use of extended cliffhangers and what happens to Luke, the emotional responses from the characters in the Hoth base, Echo base, the background characters just come out of nowhere and just give their lines because of course they're there and that makes sense. It feels lived in. And that's, to me, is the thing that makes that film in particular stand out so much. It feels like you're in a real galaxy, a real working place, beyond what we get elsewhere, by and large.
Yeah, I guess if I had to tack one thing onto it, like what's the best thing about it, to me, it's just like the strength of the characters, like even the villains. I mean, that's Vader at his most Vadery, and it's, I love to watch that. Even though I'm usually on the side of the heroes, like he just makes evil look so cool.
Join me.
That's my biggest problem with the prequels, is that one of them wasn't a Darth Vader movie. I wanted a Darth Vader movie. He's just so good at being bad. To use the cliched term.
It's the film that set the idea that sequels can be better than the originals as well. Because it drew it back in and made it a character piece. Like you say, it wasn't trying to be this epic. It was an epic on top of it, but it was trying to be the character piece following the epic kind of clash of good and evil. It kind of set that tone for how you do a sequel in trilogy history.
It wasn't just riding on the coattails of its predecessor. It was actually trying to be its own thing.
And in doing so, it became the thing, the Star Wars film.
And I think it works the way that it's meant to work. Like when it's funny, it's not ironically funny. Like, oh, this is so bad, it's terrible. Like I genuinely laugh when C-3PO, like interrupts the romance going on. Like that to me is genuinely well set up comedy. Yoda giving Luke a hard time. I was like laughing at like this stupid little troll, and then being weirded out and then almost afraid of him when he revealed what he was really like when I was a kid. Like it was an incredibly effective movie, and I just have stronger feelings in that than any of the other Star Wars movies. I feel more when I'm re-experiencing it.
Exactly the same with me. A lot of powerful moments just littered throughout. But yeah, that answers that question then for all three of us.
Now, I'm guessing, I bet we do have the same answer for the next one. Least favorite film.
Oh God, this is easy. Last Jedi.
Last Jedi.
It's
Agreed.
like, or more formally, Star Wars
And
Episode 8, The Last Jedi.
And
Yeah.
I kind of want to say, I want to say something. A lot of people have gone like, really? You don't hate this movie? Because I said, like in our original podcast, I don't hate this movie. I honestly don't. And I don't. And really, if I had to put a reason as to why, it's because it's so alien that to me, it's not really Star Wars. So I can't hate it. I'm not offended by it. It's just like this thing that I can't even process. But it's easily the worst made or written story, told on screen for me. Like, I don't know how that's a movie that somebody looked at and goes, yep, this is ready. Let's do this.
It really baffles me. I'm in the same place. It's not Star Wars to me for obvious reasons. But beyond that, the thing that irritated me about it most is that the fact that, as you said, how do people say this was a completed piece? How do people sign off on this? It so fundamentally doesn't work on any level. Narratively, characterly, arc-wise, thematically. Even undermining what came before, not just the old canon, but the previous film from the new kind of era. It just does not work on any level for me. And obviously, then of course the character assassination of Luke Skywalker, which I think is the formal title of the film. Connor.
Yes, but it's a contradiction on every single level. It contradicts the established lore and themes of the Star Wars setting, and it contradicts itself. It's like talking about the character of Rose for a second. End of the movie, she says, "We won't win this war by destroying what we hate. We'll win this war by saving what we love." Yet we're expected to cheer her on when earlier in the movie she destroys what she hates in a petty act of vandalism by cutting loose the racehorse analogs on the casino planet. We're expected to cheer her on while she destroys what she hates and then agree with her when she pulls out this flimsy moral posturing bullshit.
As in that very second, in the background, she's undermining her point. She's dooming what she loves. It's like, well, what are you doing? And paired that with Poe, whose lesson is supposed to be, no, I need to be more conservative and think about the people and our resources and not drive ahead all the time, as he doesn't drive ahead the moment he should. He was right in that instance to carry on and doesn't, because the lesson I learned, nothing makes sense, nothing works there. It's just, it's so
well,
mental.
I have argued with you, Callan, about little tiny details for years now, and there are things I can turn my brain off from and enjoy, but that movie, I can't do that. I mean, there's just none of it makes sense because of what you guys are saying. I mean, if you really, you don't have to think about it for it to fall apart. It's like it wasn't assembled to begin with. It was just like this pile of cards, as opposed to like a house of cards that you had to, flip over or knock down.
It was like it was written half an hour at a time, like almost like an anthology of TV show episodes where each episode ends with a cliffhanger, but then on the next episode, instead of resolving the cliffhanger, they just pull the rug out from under your feet and abort the situation. That works fine once or twice, but this movie did it for its entire runtime, start to finish, and as a result, it basically has no plot. There's no storyline there. It's just a random sequence of events.
Yeah, and Matt, you said it was an unassembled array of parts. Unfortunately, the parts were drawn from the foundations of other masterworks. Here, Luke Skywalker. This is a character that exists. Now let's take him from this, rip him apart, disassemble him, burn him, throw him into a meat grinder, and then put what comes out, and then say that's Luke Skywalker, and then say that's a good thing. The themes that are attached to the film, forget the past, kill it if you have to. Why is that the theme you are going for?
I said many times, why is this story being told? And I will never really be able to accept. It feels like an accident. This movie was made without supervision. The parents were gone. The babysitter was asleep. And this was what was made. It's like, I would call it irresponsible filmmaking. It's just bad.
Yeah, and then you see the extra scenes that come out of, you see Hamill just literally breaking down and crying on set. Breaking down and crying on set because of what he's having to do. It's just...
I feel bad for laughing at that, but that's just so darkly funny to me. Like, just the fact that happened. Like, and I mean, there's a part of Hollywood that's horrible. And I think that's like the face
no
you can
one
put
thought,
on it.
this guy is clearly feeling something, and he should probably know better than us on this. Maybe we should look at a rework, possibly. Nope, just plow ahead. He's wrong. I'm right. Let's do it. And no one's, thought. No one thought to stop that. It baffles me. Honestly, it does.
Yeah, it's like here's the sad thing. Relatively recently, I went to rewatch the Clone Wars movie, just to see if my appreciation of the film, the fact that I like it, was maybe just a weird sort of time and place thing, and that maybe something changed. I rewatched it. Nope, I still like it, which is so ironic considering how much vitriol I have for the series. But I like the Clone Wars movie because, despite literally being an anthology of half-hour TV show episodes, it still has a storyline that adds up and that you can follow. It still presents characters who, while not necessarily great, are at least consistent. It's a movie that actually does its best to honor the themes of the Star Wars setting and does its best to stay consistent with itself. And for that reason, it's like, despite being a lesser addition to the roster of Star Wars movies, it's still a worthy addition, despite all of its flaws, despite how low it is. It's kind of like how Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, for all of its flaws, is still a true Star Trek movie. It's not taking a shit on the franchise the way the Abrams Star Trek movies are. Last Jedi is not a worthy Star Wars movie. It is not a worthy addition to the roster. It is unworthy.
For me, it's just unworthy to be considered a good movie, full stop. You take the Star Wars name off it. That's why I can't stand it. It doesn't work. There's the through lines of narrative, through lines of character development. It's all broken, and I don't understand how people can defend it on that level, personally. Enjoy it, fine, but think it's good, I don't understand that. Personally.
Yeah, I agree.
I would just love to be able to set down Thor's hammer Mjolnir on the chest of the Last Jedi and just walk away.
Just leave it there.
I'm the tiniest, most optimistic part of my soul that hasn't been, destroyed yet is still waiting for everyone to come out, like waiting for later, tonight or tomorrow on April 1st for them to say that was all a joke. That wasn't the real Star Wars movie. Like forget that. I mean, it's just so.
It would be interesting to see if that ever happened. If they actually decided, you know what, guys, we accept this was a mistake. We're actually going to remove and redo this. I think that would be a first in living history, effectively, for that kind of material.
Yeah, that would be shocking, though. Like for a studio to recant their movie.
It would be. But I would appreciate it and say yes, good, and it would open the path to this being able to be done for better and worse in other instances as well. It's definitely a film that I feel deserves recanting. I honestly don't see any defense to this film.
But it's the only movie I've ever seen like that, though. Like honestly,
yeah.
So it's and it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's just. I don't understand it. I do not understand.
It's the Batman v Superman of Star Wars movies. That's exactly what it is.
Film. Oh, it's an insult. But yeah. Anyway, I think we've summated that pretty well.
So the next question is: if you could write your own Star Wars novel, what would it be about, Connor?
Well, my original answer in my original questionnaire was write a Star Wars novel about Darth Ruin. And my answer has not changed. That's a part of the Star Wars setting that has remained very mysterious. The circumstances of Thanius's fall to the dark side and the reformation of the Sith Order and basically the start of the new Sith Wars, because it's essentially the distant prelude to the rise of Darth Bane. And one thing I've actually decided in retrospect is I think that the Old Republic MMO would have worked so much better if this was the story, if it was telling. If Emperor Vitiate was Darth Ruin, because that would make so much more sense, because all of the crazy-ass story ideas they're pushing in the MMO, well, I feel that they would actually fit as being the start of the new Sith Wars, because one of the big aspects of the new Sith Wars is that it's a time period where the Star Wars universe basically went into its dark age, where records were lost, historical facts were mixed up and misconstrued, and people didn't really know what happened. And the idea of the Eternal Empire just wandering into that setting and fucking shit up would fit, and no one knowing about it in later eras would make sense because, well, guess what? All the records of the Eternal Empire were lost. It would have worked Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. That it's almost two different topics, though. But I like that idea that if for no other reason, then it wouldn't have blasted apart so much of the mythology that made characters like Revan and the characters that were all intersected with that story. It wouldn't have blown all that wide open. It would have fit better during that time period, if for no other reason, because it would have been divorced from those characters. But yeah, I agree with that, and especially you're right. Like there isn't really much. It's exactly what you're saying. It is a distant prelude to Darth Bane's era. It's the I don't know what number schism at this point, but it's the Jedi reviving the Sith again.
Yeah. And Darth Ruin himself, it's like what little is described of his character to me is just fascinating. He's described as being a raging solipsist, thyself is God maniac. But it's like the way he's described is he's in the mold of Darth Treya, but he broke the mold and murdered the mold maker. So what I'm left with is like, oh my God, is this guy like the Star Wars universe's answer to Voldemort? Callan? Voldemort, yell!
You're expecting him to go.
You want me to go? Yeah.
Yes.
That really should have been. That really should have been rehearsed.
I'm not sure how I was supposed to get that, but okay.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, Callan, I don't see how you were supposed to either. But although you are English now.
That's true. I am British, which means I should inherently understand all of these things. What would be your story, Matt?
Like Connor, I have not changed my answer. And strangely for me, it's about a Sith, but it's because it's about a Sith that, unlike any that we've ever been described, the story of Darth Gravid, who basically sabotaged the rise of the rule of two Sith about midway through because he turned to the light side, or was attempting to, and was trying to destroy all the Sith knowledge repositories that he had at his disposal. Prior to doing that.
Man after man heart.
That's just a story that I don't even know what I would do with it, but it's such an interesting. I don't create stories very well. I can't create like my own ideas very well, but I can build off of like a skeleton, I think. And that's a really interesting skeleton, that story, that's one I would have a lot of fun telling, just so much he can do with that. Like, what's his reasoning? Who was he before he had this change? He has a built-in arc right there, where I don't even have to come up with one.
What was the
I just need to fill it in.
Change and the relationship between his apprentice and him. Why was his apprentice different? Was there a conflict there? Were they unsure in their encountering of him? There's so much to play with. Yeah.
We're told just enough that we know certain things. We even know the apprentice's gender and whatnot. But I mean, it's just like, okay. What do I do with this? And again, the uniqueness of that story. And also for a Sith of that particular line to be swayed over by light side teachings, like what would necessitate that? Plagueis even floated out the possibility that the grand plan, as they call it, would have already come to fruition if it hadn't been for Gravid derailing everything, which is, a good explanation as to why it took them 1,000 goddamn years to get something accomplished in the first place. So yeah, that to me is an interesting playground. I want to go play in it. I'd write that story.
Absolutely. If I had to write a story about the Sith, which I would definitely not enjoy doing, that would be the exactly the story I would tell, because for that same reason of how interesting a dynamic it is on every level. For me personally, mine would be a lot smaller in scale than your two. It would be a character story, and it would involve one of my favourite characters from Star Wars, Elizabeth and Esterhazy.
I knew it.
The story of Scout.
I was going to say, it's Scout, isn't it? Yeah.
I want to see her survive Order 66. I want to see her go on to help forge the New Jedi Order with Luke. I want to see her as the Master to Corran Horn for the reasons that they both struggle with the Force, and also both represent the best of the Jedi in more ways than one. Yoda's line of the brightest stars shine in the night, or the just because you're not one of the brightest stars shining in the night sky doesn't mean you're not a star distant or all by yourself.
Yeah, see,
that kind of idea is just beautiful to me, and their characters are interesting.
And when you say something like that, I mean that's such an easy thing to juxtapose with like The Last Jedi, with like Rose's failed speech at the end, like where it's just like this thing that's supposed to be like a nice soundbite, but it means nothing. The old canon was full of all that. quotes that like build you up or could almost be hackneyed and corny, but they mean something, and they're in the context of a story that you genuinely love and can relate to and follow.
Yeah, the
So,
story
yeah,
and
I
the characters.
totally see
Yoda
that.
was saying that to state why he valued Scouts, and in an earnest way, and in a way that lent gravity to what he was saying. It lent meaning to her personally. It helped define, how she would move forward in the story from that point. It had power, and as the nature of her character makes it meaningful for me.
Even your detail about her being a perfect master for Corran Horn, like if you gave that script to whoever's in charge now, they'd go, this, you can't publish this. This makes too much sense. Like, no, it's not going to work. They dismiss it immediately.
Who's Scout? Who's Corran Horn? We need new, simple. We don't need this complicated connection or anything. That would be the approach. And to me, that's the biggest travesty of throwing away the EU. The integration of old material was so there and viable, and they just said, why not? Why would we want to do that when we could make it easier for ourselves? But yeah, I would tell the story of how she survived and how she flourished and how she developed moving forward, and ultimately then took on the mentorship of Corran Horn. I think that would be an excellent dynamic to just dive into.
Well,
also, she needs more stories. She was robbed from from even in the EU side of things. She had one book, and it wasn't even her focus, and it's like, oh.
If I was in charge, I'd give you free rein there. I agree with everything you're saying there. So we have, I think, 5 more questions here. Which film has your favorite soundtrack, Connor?
Oh, easy. Revenge of the Sith. That's the point where John Williams had truly kind of come to, it's the point where his Star Wars composing skills were truly at their best, at their peak. That's the point where he had 5 Star Wars films up to this to work with George Lucas. He had his shit together, which, unlike with Force Awakens, which was rather bland, Revenge of the Sith is whatever you say about the movie, there's just no question that the soundtrack to Revenge of the Sith is hands down the best.
The soundtrack of the prequels in general is my favorite thing about the prequels, period. Personally, my favorite soundtrack to revisit is The Phantom Menace because it's relaxing, whereas The Revenge of the Sith is full of all this bombast and, orchestral, just these insane compositions. But I love it. Don't get me wrong. But if I just have it on, while I'm doing something else, which I frequently do, The Phantom Menace is my favorite to revisit because of how relaxing it is. But my favorite singular track from all the films is probably in Revenge of the Sith. And to me, it's Anakin's Dark Deeds, which I love. I love that track. It's amazing, especially the ending.
Same for me, Revenge of the Sith. To me, it's the culmination of all the different great things about the Star Wars soundtrack in one, taken to the nth degree. It is just. You've mentioned before, Matt, and I'm credit you with this description, that the prequels could work better as in kind of an opera piece. Just listening through the soundtrack.
If you watch them, there is a cut of the movies. I can't remember what it's called. I think it might be called. It's not Across the Stars because that's the name of the track from Attack of the Clones, but it's something like that. There is a track of the movies where they or there's a cut of the movies where they removed all the dialogue, and it's just like an edited visual montage basically of the movie with nothing but the score. It's arguably better that way.
Yeah, it is just powerful. I mean, to me, the prequel trilogy, full stop, the music is better than the originals, even just from the scope and range of what's being covered. The nature of the material. It's got an emotional through line that really just, in an opera, like you say, in the opera piece, it just really hits you hard, and it's really powerful. And even in the simple stuff that you don't immediately call out as being that important, the march of the droids on Naboo, dun 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 dun, stuff like that is instantly iconic as Star Wars. And that's not that important a piece, in the grand scheme of the story, and yet it has that power behind it.
I think the thing is, when you listen to it, you instantly know where you are, or what the imagery was, or what the feelings you had when you were in the theater. It's one of those. It's nostalgic, but it also works well in the context of the film, and it speaks more about the setting than the characters who live in it do. To be honest.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's my feeling on all the prequels. But again, just Revenge of the Sith is the biggest example, singular example.
I would definitely agree with Connor's point that that's definitely the film where the music works the best. Like it's perfectly aligned with like the script. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's the best use of music. I just prefer to revisit the Phantom Menace one, but Revenge of the Sith is amazing. I have no complaints.
So yeah, that's that other question. Moving on.
This next one's quick. Do you collect figures? No.
Nope.
Mm,
I collected
no,
Lego
but
back in the day.
I have figures because what's happened with me is that my family knows I'm a big fan of Star Wars, but the problem is that I'm at the point where it's easier to name the Star Wars books that I don't have than the ones I do because my collection is that extensive. So at this point, they're just kind of defaulting to figures, just easy way out. So Darth Vader Pez dispenser.
God, you've been trying to get that on camera for months at this point.
Success.
Victory game.
And it will return.
Anyway.
But yeah, no figures for me. I collected Lego back in the day. I still have all of the sets that I collected, but that's it. I never got the figures of Star Wars.
That cultural difference arising again. You collected your Lego, not Legos.
Oh. I heard sheeps. No, it's cheap. But yeah.
Okay. This next one's a loaded one. We've been talking for a long time. Let's try to keep it brief, even though I know it's not like a simple question. In your opinion, what is the best thing about the expanded universe?
Oh.
Basically, the grand cohesive fictional history. It's one of those. Basically, what the writers of the expanded universe is that they went and created something directly comparable to the Tolkien Legendarium in terms of just the internal consistency, the sheer breadth of information, and the amount of characters. The fact that you can basically turn a discussion of the Star Wars expanded universe into an intellectual pursuit. The fact that the term EU scholar is a thing. It's like, I'm an expanded universe scholar. It's like, that's not hyperbole. That is literally what I do.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. To me, I enjoy the original Star Wars films as films. I grew up with them. The prequels, I don't enjoy them as much on the same level, but what I do enjoy is the door that opened to like this world. You look at that, you go, I want to know about this world. And then when you start down that path, forever
will it dominate your destiny.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you get lost in it, and it's almost impossible not to. I mean, like you said,
I'm
you can.
I'm late for a very important date.
Yeah.
How many times is yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's just you can talk like there's themes like, I mean, Krea's story is arguably like somebody having an existential crisis. You have like the Jedi and the Sith, sort of like this quasi-religious war on some level. You've got just war and just the nature of it, and like it can be fantastical and sort of almost comical and silly and farcical when you have like certain groups of characters and which time period you're dealing with, and then you can have straight up Heart of Darkness with Mace Windu Shatterpoint basically being just that.
But at the same time, you can go in the other direction and have more kid-friendly storylines, just focusing on the little kids training in the Jedi Temple. They have their stories to tell. Like, come on, Liam the Padawan. Let's hear some more about that guy.
Could tell literally any story, and while they do have misfires, they all have the potential to be good, and it's limitless. Even though the expanded universe doesn't really exist anymore, and the incarnation that we love it's still there, and it's expansive. Feels stupid to say that, but I mean, it's just so huge.
That's the thing I was going for. The reason I love my favorite thing about the expanded universe is it is an expansive universe. It is a wealth of material on all different topics, different genres, different stories, different scales, different messages. Everything about it. It is the science fantasy universe. Period. And what it did for decades hasn't been paralleled by any other material, with the possible exception of the DC and Marvel universes in the comic realm. But even they pale in comparison when it comes to the continuity that it achieved throughout the work, which is why I oppose the deletion of it so strongly. because of what it means for fiction and world building and fictional worlds. I think it's important what we've had here.
Worst thing about the EU, in our opinion?
That is an expansive universe that has gone on for decades and has basically all of what I just said, but the bad parts of it. Unfortunately, the nature of something as fluid and diverse and in depth as it is that there are so many people working on it that it creates inconsistencies. The thing is, the reason that I don't care about that, it's the worst thing about the EU for sure, but the reason I don't care is because you can so easily just work around the inconsistencies in your head. The general consensus of fans of Star Wars have been doing that for years. I can't think of an example where one thing was like kind of overwritten and everyone decided to jump on the overwritten kind of consistency or inconsistency rather, and take that as fact. To me, if it was an inconsistency, it was pretty much universally recognised as that, with the exception of kind of new canon alterations. It was kind of a non-issue. It was just a weakness when you isolate it in a vacuum. So that would be it for me.
Yeah.
For me, the most general way I can say it is some characters are overused to the point that they had a lifespan that unfortunately went beyond what was natural for them because they were popular, and so they were used and reused, and so their stories became diluted. Revan probably being the biggest example of that. But yeah, I mean, not the only example though, but I mean, to me, it's just they didn't always know when to quit telling stories with certain batches of characters. That's the most general way I can say it without being here for another 5 hours discussing it.
For me, my attitude is very similar. It's, well, too many people working on the same things. It's like the Clone Wars era is absolutely cluttered, especially with the addition of Star Wars The Clone Wars, which one of the reasons why I don't like it is because before TCW came along, the Clone Wars era was arguably the best of the EU. It was where it had the greatest level of consistent quality in all of its material, where everything meshed together with only minor inconsistencies, like the difference between Labyrinth of Evil and the Clone Wars microseries and stuff like that. But all of it was very minor stuff that you could easily just work around. But then TCW came in here with blatant and direct contradictions of so many long-established facts. And, well, as far as I'm concerned, TCW is Disney canon, end of story.
See, I'm not as hardline in that area. To me, I blend the two, mostly because all the problems with the Clone Wars, in my eyes, could have been avoided if they just warped it differently. It was marketing choices that made the biggest one, with that being Ahsoka. I think I'm right in saying that all five of us like Ahsoka, right? We just don't like the position she was placed in the universe.
Yeah, don't make her Anakin's Padawan. Don't make anyone Anakin's Padawan. Anakin needs no Padawan. Why would you do that, Jedi Council? That's horrible.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah, why would you do that, Jedi Council? Why would you do that, creators? But she as a character is great, right? So just put her as Plo's apprentice. That problem solved. The different representations of the characters they've made, Voss, for example, and they just failed that. Do that better. Problem solved. Yeah. It's such a fixable series for all its faults.
Or just don't do that. You don't have to use Quinlan in your series. Just don't. But if you do, please don't ruin him.
Yeah.
That's all I ask. And they didn't do that. New
characters if you're not going to work with the old ones, right? And that's the problem with the Clone Wars. I could blend it easily in my head with the original Legends and do.
I was looking. I was looking forward to the show until it showed up and undid, like Connor said, so much that I mean, and again. Needlessly, why a Mora band? Why? I mean, it's just. But yeah, I mean,
Clone Wars is also a perfect example of one of the other problems. Going back to too many people working on the same stuff. The problem is that a lot of the people working on certain stuff just didn't understand the material. It's like Star Wars: The Clone Wars in its portrayal of Darth Maul. They completely misunderstood his character and messed him up. They were operating under the assumption that Maul was a true, genuine Sith Lord and were trying to characterize him as such, where, no, it was the exact opposite. Maul was Palpatine's indoctrinated cult follower. He was trained to be entirely submissive to his master, to the point where if Palpatine ever ordered him to commit suicide, Maul would do so without hesitation. It's like that's the sort of person Maul is.
That being said, for all of its faults, at least that material at least captured the essence of what Star Wars is. You can see that in almost every instance of the show and every episode and arc. There are obviously exceptions, and there are bits where it spikes in quality dramatically on top of that. But whereas the departure between that and what we get now is so...
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I don't like the show in general, but when it gets something right, it does get it right, and it does at least feel... It has that Star Wars, that quasi-undefinable or indefinable trait. It feels like the same universe at the very least. Whereas this new canon material it's Star Wars in name only for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's that question.
Final question now. And I don't know, I can't remember what I originally said to this. What does Star Wars mean to you?
Well, I'll open this up. My answer isn't a straight answer. It's an anecdote. Just after the Disney buyout and the retconning of the expanded universe, that's the point where I kind of experienced my own personal sort of Star Wars fan funk, where I was like, I had kind of lost faith in the franchise and was depressed and was seriously considering just closing up shop, calling it quits, ending my YouTube channel, selling off my books, and moving on to something else. But during that period, I got hold of Dark Times Volume 5 Fire Carrier, which basically deals with K'Krukk's sort of his actions and activities in the immediate aftermath of Order 66, where he's basically stuck trying to look after this tiny little group of surviving Jedi initiates, Jedi younglings, and just trying to keep them alive, survive, and get through this crisis. And at the end of this storyline, which got pretty bleak in places, they found an abandoned Jedi outpost on this outer rim world called Arkinia, and they decided, okay, we're going to repair this place, retake possession of it. This will be my new Jedi training facility, my secret place far from prying eyes, where we can continue to practice the Jedi way without fear. And that was the moment where I truly realized what I was going to do now that the expanded universe was effectively done and Disney was going to proceed with their rape of the franchise. I was going to be K'Kruk in the Arkinian Enclave, teaching those younglings, making sure that the old ways never die.
Again, need to point out it's not Disney, it's Kathleen Kennedy in the story group. But yeah, I get your sentiment. Yeah, no, I can understand that. I remember you telling me that story before, actually. That was what kind of re-sparked your interest, or re-held your interest anyway, recaptured. For me, it goes back to what I was saying about the EU, that, it's an expansive universe. It is the science fantasy universe for me. Any story you want to tell, you can tell in the Star Wars universe. There are so many RPG games built around that very fact. The fact that you can just tell any story, any genre, any group of characters, and the universe is your oyster with it, and it has that feel, that, as Matt said, that undefinable feel, capturing that, wrapping around it, and letting you know that you are in the Star Wars universe. You sit in a Star Wars story and you look around and you don't just see generic sci-fi. You see Star Wars, and I love that. Put simply,
I don't have some eloquent way of putting it. It's just that idea, like you just said, and that we've touched on, the idea that Star Wars has the capacity to tell any story that you can imagine, and they more or less already have, and that's the great thing about it. That period that Connor mentioned, during that period, I sort of lost interest in talking to other people about Star Wars, because so many people were eating up this material that to me was not only different, but far inferior to what I knew, had immersed myself in. And but I never entertained any idea of just being done with it. I've had many people comment to me or tell me, I'm sort of over it, or I can't enjoy it anymore because they shat all over the timeline and all that. I'm giving it up. It's I can't give it up. Like Star Wars, and it's not like an addiction, okay? I don't want it to sound that way. It's just it's so linked to my development. Sort of the way I process whether or not I think a story is being told properly or has depth comes from my experience with KOTOR, which I played as a 12, 13-year-old. It informed that. It's got some of my favorite music of all time. I've got memories of seeing the films in re-release, in theaters. It was something that my dad liked. I think it's arguably the first live action thing that I watched with my parents that we all enjoyed, as opposed to, whatever Disney cartoon they sat through on my behalf. It's so linked to just my life that like I enjoy it, and it's weird how it's pan-generational because it's so much older than me. It goes back to 1977, and just the fact that it's still fucking relevant and marketed to children all this time later is insane to me. But yeah, Star Wars is just like this thing that I can't let go of, no matter how much they're trying to make me with this new shit.
The Force
just
will
can't
be
give it
with
up.
you always.
Yep, always.
Sorry.
I actually have similar memories of playing the video game Star Wars: The Clone Wars. The one the episode 2 tie-in that was released back in 2002 for the original Xbox. I have memories of playing that game's multiplayer with my brothers and my dad, and we'd just be playing the vehicle sections and just blowing the hell out of each other in the various vehicles available in the game. And I remember how I would always love to pick the Hailfire droid because unload on everyone with missiles. Yeah. And it's like that, just those fond memories of doing that with it was a little point where I could really connect with all the members of my family because we'd just be playing together in Star Wars vehicles, shooting each other, or bits where we play the Geonosis map and I would pick Yoda because back then I liked Yoda because Yoda in that game was OP. And I would just beat everyone in a lightsaber duel.
Yeah, I mean, the games, they speak for themselves. The amount of Star Wars games I've played in my life and known and loved, Battlefront being the primary example on that one. It was the first game that I knew that everyone had and loved that wasn't, a film franchise-based one, like, for example, Spider-Man 2. It was Star Wars, it's a film franchise one, but, it was one where it was a game that was separate from just purely the film content, and everyone had it and everyone loved it, and it was like the first big game like that for me, and it was so good. But Power Battles, Jedi Starfighter. I mean, I got the name Reti from Jedi Starfighter, so that was also in Starfighter by itself, but I played Jedi Starfighter first. Just the games, there's what can you say about all of those? There's so many and they are so varied. They're as varied and as amazing as the EU is itself, and as Matt said, it's all pan-generational as well, so.
Yeah, there's something about Star Wars that just has that classic quality where even though you've seen it 1,000 times or played that game 1,000 times or read that book 1,000 times, you're going to do it 1,000 more times. And you never lose interest in telling other people why you like to. It's just one of those classic things.
But yeah, I think that's a good point to end on, guys.
I need to go replay KOTOR.
It's been a long one, but I hope you guys have enjoyed. Put in your comment section the answers to the questionnaire yourselves. We'd be interested in reading people's responses and what kind of ideas they have to discuss. I'm Reti4, and I still don't have an outro.
Sure he doesn't. Great Jedi 91. Bye, guys.
Jensaarai1 signing off. Good night, YouTube.
Goodbye.